one and all to the K.O.E. Nation for a very special reply video. I am replying to YouTuber HanzOfHarkir and his book review of the book The People No by Thomas Frank. Definitely check out HanzOfHarkir. Definitely check out The People No. Both, I suspect, worth your time. But I was asked to give my perspective on this particular book and this review because, well, your King of Extreme is just right in so many ways. So I figured, why not? So for this particular evening, your King of Extreme is now also the prince and potentate of the political parlance as we dive deep into this particular book review. And we will be cutting in between HanzOfHarkir and myself. Definitely check out Hans over on YouTube. I will have a link to his channel and a link to this video in particular in the description. But as I'm known to say around here, all that being said, let's get right into the review of The People No by Thomas Frank by one HanzOfHarkir.
Hey everyone, Hans here.
Hello, Hans.
Happy Monday and welcome to this week's book review. Today we'll be breaking down The People No, A Brief History of Anti-Populism by historian and political analyst Thomas Frank. In his work, Frank explains the origin of the term populism, what it is, and how it has been perceived since its inception. So, let's dive in. Populism finds its roots in 19th century America following the Civil War. A broad coalition of working people, factory workers in the North, white and black sharecroppers in the South, and farmers in the West were all feeling the squeeze of the powerful economic elites at the time, the robber barons, like Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and John D. Rockefeller.
Just as sort of a personal aside, I've always found the branding of the robber barons to be quite fascinating because it at the same time makes them seem as though they're mischievous and devious, but at the same time vaunted and high above us. So I've always found that particular branding to be very fascinating. It was tremendous persuasion, regardless of its truth value or not. It was tremendously persuasive. We're still saying it almost 100 years later. So I have to give it its due credit there. I will say a lot of people don't give folks like Rockefeller credit. I mean, the guy did kind of single-handedly save the whales. We were using whale oil to light our lamps until he figured out, hey, why don't we use the stuff we're pumping out of the ground? So I understand nobody's perfect in this life. Nirvana is not for this world, but there are at least a few of them that you could argue did leave the world better than they found it. So I just think it's fascinating that this is the branding that sticks almost 100 years later.
Whether it was steel, railroads, or oil, they dominated industries and national commerce, making it ever more difficult for farmers to sell their goods and for workers to earn a decent wage. The gold standard was still in use.
Huzzah!
Meaning regular deflationary recessions were the norm, which absolutely fleeced regular working people. The Populist Party, the closest America has ever come to a true viable third party, arose from these conditions. It was a multiracial party focused on securing the economic rights of workers. It drew voters from both the Republican and Democratic parties, and as such scared the absolute hell out of economic elites like the robber barons. The Republican Party, dominated by those financial elites, dug in, being vigorously anti-populist. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, moved closer to the Populist Party, eventually culminating in a combined Democratic populist candidate, William Jennings Bryan.
Ah, Nebraska's own William Jennings Bryan. Oh boy, let me tell you something, America. You dodged a bullet, perhaps a silver bullet with that one, with not electing one William Jennings Bryan. He was an interesting character, and what a lot of folks don't know is he was actually depicted in one of the more famous works of fiction. The Wizard of Oz was actually an allegory for economic prosperity, or whatever you like. In the original book, Dorothy wore silver slippers and she walked down the yellow brick road. So it was a metaphor for bimetallism. And when she met the Scarecrow, he represented the muddle-headed farmers who didn't quite understand the power that they had at the time. The Tin Man represented the heartless industrialists who just needed to have a little compassion. And the Cowardly Lion was none other than Nebraska's own William Jennings Bryan, which is only appropriate. I will just out and out say farmers at the time really did enjoy William Jennings Bryan's basically inflationary message, because if you're on a gold standard and you go to a bimetal standard, it is in essence inflation. And farmers at that time especially were on the borrowed side of the coin, so they very much liked inflation because you could loan $1 and then pay back what is in essence quarters. So to put it as simply as you possibly could for the times we're discussing, that was in essence William Jennings Bryan's basic goal was inflation. So yes, if we're going to call an inflationist goal populism, I'm sure, I suppose.
In the 1896 election against Republican William McKinley, Bryan was bright and charismatic, but low on funds, making his case as best he could with $500,000. In contrast, the McKinley campaign had upwards of potentially $16 million, one of the most expensive campaigns in history if you adjust for inflation. Outspent 30-1, Bryan was buried under an absolute mountain of cash. The Populist Party, having hedged its bets in a Democratic alliance, was broken, never to rise again. McKinley was heralded as the savior of business from the uncouth working rabble, and populism, demonized by the millions spent by the McKinley and his campaign, would not rise again for several decades. After Russia fell to communism in the 1910s, and several European states started flirting with fascism following the 1929 stock market crash, America was also in a very dangerous place. Millions were unemployed and listless, democracy was visibly on decline around the world, and fascist sentiment was brewing even here at home. Yes, really. Franklin D. Roosevelt, with his New Deal programs, like the beginnings of Social Security, a job guarantee during the recession, and a minimum wage, were integral in creating the social safety net that America currently enjoys. These actions dramatically expanded the federal government at the time, but also essentially saved American capitalism.
In economics, you generally have to not only look at the perceived gains, but you also have to try to measure the unseen losses. And one has to wonder how long were certain economic conditions elongated because of government interventions as well. In 1920, we had a crash almost as bad, if not worse, than the crash in 1929. And it more or less got sorted out in about 3 to 5 months because everyone just kind of found the jobs they need. And by the time the bureaucrats looked up from their paperwork, everybody had already found jobs. And so there was really no need for government intervention. The 1929 crash, that is one of the great unknowns because you really can't play too much alternative history there. But that is one that I do wonder, when you say saved capitalism, it's like, I might take a bit of umbrance with that, sir.
But these programs and new economic rights for Americans were absolutely lambasted by economic elites at the time, with the word populism being used for Roosevelt as well as Hitler in Germany and Mussolini in Italy. This conflation between literal fascism and the expansion of economic rights for regular people is constant and ever present in the discussion on populism. More on that in a couple minutes.
I have to straight up agree with you on that. There's really very few, if any, real parallels between even the broadest interpretations of populism and, as you put it, literal fascism. Sorry, had to. Fascism is another form of near complete government control, so I don't really see how that would be in keeping with the expansion of any kind of rights, civil, economic, personal, whatever kind of rights you're talking. I don't see how that would be compatible with any expansion of any rights. So in that regard, I do understand the frustration because it's more or less spot on.
During the 1950s, the Red Scare terrified academics, where a single accusation of communist sympathies could be the absolute death blow to your entire career and livelihood. That mob mentality was linked with the word populism, the dangerous, stupid, conspiratorial rabble attacking our intellectual elite as opposed to economic elites.
Yeah, boy howdy. Ain't that strange that when folks foster a cancel culture, there's a lot more collateral damage than actual good done from it. And maybe we shouldn't try to silence ideas and instead, try to address the ideas coming from the people giving them. I don't suppose there's any modern parallels to today with that, anywho.
This change in how populism was viewed was extremely salient in academic literature for years to come, and this muddying of the waters of the definition has made populism more difficult to understand. Frank argues that this is not true populism, as it is not consistent with the goals of expanding economic rights for a broad coalition of people.
The first point that I would make as a sort of counter to both yours and the author Frank's general idea here is across the same amount of time that we're talking that the word populism has shifted from talking about economic elites to a wider array of elites. Over that same time, we've had a shift in another word across the same time, much more radical shift, and yet we still view it as valid. And the word is liberal. Pretty much any observer of politics would concede that the definition and idea of liberal has shifted dramatically over 120 years or farther, depending on how you want to stretch it. So I understand the frustration of the idea of, well, now the word populism is incorporating more ideas than we originally intended it to, but that is much like political ideas. They're kind of like art. Once they're released to the people, they belong to the world now, so they will be changed as they will. And I understand, as I said, the frustration, but I do understand also the expansion, because as we're going to get to a little deeper, there are lots of elites, not just economic elites, that can impose significantly upon the lives of just, folks wanting to be left alone in their lives, folks that are just wanting to not be interfered with in the power game.
The next large populist movement is during the civil rights era of the 1960s, where individuals like MLK fought for both civil and economic rights. Yes, both. This isn't commonly talked about, but MLK was killed while advocating for the Poor People's Campaign.
In regards to MLK, as you put it, Martin Luther King Jr., yes, he was absolutely an advocate for economic rights as well. Everybody knows his I Have a Dream speech, but in my opinion, I think it's very worth listening to. It's about 22 minutes long. His Why I Opposed War in Vietnam speech is, in my opinion, one of the better pieces of rhetoric spoken in the 20th century. It was amazingly good rhetoric. And at points in that speech, he started talking about economic justice and such things. It's like, okay, like because like you and me, Hans, we're too young for that generation. We don't have that kind of context, so we have to listen to the old speeches. And yes, you're absolutely right in that regard. He was fighting for economic rights and civil rights,
which advocated for increased economic rights for Americans black and white alike. That is the spirit of original populism, an expansion for the economic and civil rights for all people, a noble striving that is demonized by putting it in the same category as aggressive mob conspiracies and, again, literal fascism. So this brings us to the present day, where politicians like Donald Trump and Senator Bernie Sanders are both considered populists, despite being as far apart politically as you really can be in elected American politics, and you see the traditions that they each represent. Sanders is a callback to the pure populist tradition of economic rights and justice, going from the Populist Party to FDR to MLK, a demand and challenge to the economic elites of this nation. The idea that you, regardless of your skin color or the conditions you were born into, you have fundamental civil and, yes, economic rights as a citizen of America.
I absolutely agree with you, Hans. We all have fundamental economic rights. I suspect you and I might differ on what those fundamental economic rights are. Just a smidge, just a little, just a dash. Me, I do believe that everybody has the rights that are granted in a great free market economy of free exchange, free ideas, free commerce. That allows people to rise to the top. That allows people to make themselves better in their lives. With other systems of government, they do have a real incentive problem. So I understand some folks we might differ on this issue, but I do agree with you that every single person has fundamental economic rights. Now, what those rights might be, you and I might interpret that in an entirely different way, and I suspect we might. And that, folks, might be a discussion for another day. But moving onward and upward with the video.
Trump, on the other hand, hearkens to the opposite tradition of attacking intellectual or cultural elites, ignoring or in many cases aiding economic power centers. Similarly, maddeningly, many journalistic institutions do not make the distinction. I think that is somewhat on purpose and frustratingly obtuse in an attempt to muddy the waters. One argues for increasing economic security for all people. One attacks academics and our institutions.
One would think that, especially in our current era of coronavirus and the restrictions that we all live under, one could certainly understand how an academic, an expert, or an institutional elite of some sort of unelected bureaucracy could suddenly affect the lives of tens of millions of people, and some of it in a very negative and in some cases even unfair fashion. So I understand the original frustration, but especially in the era we live today, you would have to understand the expansion of the word populism to, all right, we have someone that's going to stand between us and some of these unelected institutional elites that are now going to dictate to us how it's gonna be. So I could understand how a person that could position themselves that way, even just through framing, would very much be viewed as a populist. So I hope that is kind of getting a little bit to the core of what our issue here is. And I think one of the things you probably asked me about most about why you wanted me to give an analysis on right-wing populism in comparison to this book. That would be one way of putting it. I hope that at least is somewhat helpful because, yes, we do have institutions that have nothing to do with elected government that still very much wield the power of government that very much holds power over people. So I can understand.
But yes, they're both grumpy old men who yell during speeches, so they are obviously the same. Give me a break. Frank is very upfront in his opinion that Trump is not a real populist, and the true successor to that muddled and maligned tradition is Senator Bernard Sanders and the modern American left. In an academic sense, I have to agree, but at this point, it kind of feels like the modern vernacular has made this distinction extremely difficult to make, and is it even really worth it at this point to try and take back the term populism?
Ha ha! Victory for the righties! We took populism! Ha ha ha! Oh, sorry. I'll let you go.
I found The People No very interesting, and it absolutely fills in the gaps as to how two politicians who are as different as can be can be considered successors to the same mantle. On readability, I give it an 8 out of 10. The words just glide for you, smooth and easy chapter to chapter. On generality, I give it a 7 out of 10. It's helpful for understanding the modern political climate, but it takes a while to get there with a lot of history that you might not need. On specificity, I give it a 9 out of 10. I think the distinctions of populism are extremely important for higher level political conversations. So that means overall, it's an 8 out of 10. This book is worth your time, especially if you're interested in politics, history, or political analysis. I hope you enjoy this review. Please like and subscribe and all that, and come back next week. I do a new review every single Monday. If you have a book you want me to look at, let me know in the comments. I always appreciate recommendations. Until next time, this is Hans, signing out. Bye, everyone.
Everyone, that was HanzOfHarkir and his 7-minute review that I might have added 1 or 2 minutes to, of The People No by Thomas Frank. And Hans, if there's anything that I left out, if there's any arguments that you feel were incomplete or you'd like me to dive deeper, please let me know. I'm sure there was 1 or 2. You gotta give me a few allowances here. I just learned how to cut this all together in YouTube videos now, so I'm coming along. So this one, if there's a few jerkiness, if there's a little bit of jerkiness to the debate, that's on my end and my learning curve. But beyond that, this was a marvelous book review that did cause me to think. Like, just your review had to consider things for a moment, which that in and of itself makes it worthwhile. And in regards to populism, like I said a little earlier, yes, this is an expansion of a term. We've expanded terms like liberalism and shifted them significantly. I don't see why populism would be somehow excluded from this, and I hope I've at least somewhat made my case as to why it would be expanded to people that may not necessarily be in elected government, that may not necessarily just talk about the expansion of one particular kind of right, and it would be very easy for that term to very suddenly transmogrify to all the different rights, and how you expand any of these types of rights is a form of populism. So I understand it might not be to the proper King's English 100%, but I really don't have a problem with an expansion of such a term. Please, let me know in any kind of reply. Folks, let me know in the comments section what you think about this and my review of a book review in response to one HanzOfHarkir, which after you like, share, subscribe right here to K.O.E. Nation, head right on over to HanzOfHarkir on YouTube. Like, share, subscribe to him so you can see more of his amazing, spectacular, ascendant book reviews. You will, and I promise, with each one you watch, you will get just tiny, infinitesimal. You almost can't measure it. I don't think you can, but the tiniest bit smarter. Yeah, I think that's, yes, that will definitely happen. So head on over to HanzOfHarkir, get a tiny bit smarter. It'll be fun, folks. It'll be fun. And as I'm known to say around here, all that being said, thank you for joining me for this review of The People No, reviewed by HanzOfHarkir. Check out Hans, check out Thomas Frank, folks. And most of all, like, share, subscribe to me here at KOE Nation. Check me out on Thirsty Thursdays over at the Dog and Chicken Show at Big Bucket Entertainment. And once in a while, I'm even known to stop in at the Tomfoolery Show as well. So, folks, please, like, share, subscribe, follow me when you can, follow Hans, follow us all, and I will catch you later.